This is the place for history on the KY3 Digital Desk, except today we are not at the desk. We're in Independence, Missouri, outside the Truman Library and Museum. Let's go inside and meet some of the people. Well, we're here with Sam Rouchet from the Truman Library and Museum, and you're the senior archivist here, and we're talking about NATO in this segment on the Place for History on the KY3 Digital Desk, and the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Very few people say that now. It's just NATO. All these years later, NATO is still growing. Just added Sweden just a few weeks ago.
That's right.
What does that say to you about the legacy of the foundation of this organization, that it's still growing?
Well, I think that NATO continues to be very significant, and its significance is in the United States, of course, but also in Europe, which was the Western Europe, which was the center for the alliance. It was a regional defense pact for mutual defense as a way to deter the Soviet Union from its expansionism or aggression in Europe after World War II. And it was seen as really the best way to meet that Soviet threat. And its endurance continues to this day. Just last week, 3 delegations, diplomatic and military, came to the Truman Library from NATO members, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, who had in 1999, 25 years ago, joined NATO in our very auditorium here. It was also Madeleine Albright, then Secretary of State, was also here at the Truman Library. So that was 1999. This is after the end of the Cold War. The Soviet Union has dissolved, but NATO was still seen as relevant in the 1990s to Europe, and is seen equally relevant to this day.
So they would have stood in this area and looked at the displays and commented on the displays.
They did the accession agreement in our own auditorium, not far from where we're sitting right here, and also not far from where we're sitting, just like last week, came to pay honor to the Truman Library and to kind of reiterate how important NATO is to their respective countries and how important their ties are to the United States. And I think it's a sign of real, the enduring, as you mentioned, the enduring importance or legacy of NATO.
Who is the main driver, if you take us back in time to when this is all getting started? Who's the main driver of all this? Is it a person or a country?
That's an excellent question. I would say it is a collection of countries. World War II ended in 1945, and shortly after that time, 5 countries in Europe banded together in their own kind of a regional defense alliance. It was Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, the Benelux countries as they were known, and it was called the Brussels Pact. And that became the foundation for a larger defense alliance that became NATO. So the United States was always open to those conversations with our European allies and friends, and Harry Truman was determined to do whatever he could to try to preserve peace and prevent war after World War II, and also to prevent the expansion of Soviet communism into Western Europe. And so the main drivers, I would say, were probably those main countries, especially our British allies and the French. But the United States was very open to these conversations, and very willing to talk about what could be done to try to meet the Soviet threat.
And what difference does the Berlin blockade make in the formation of NATO? Does that kickstart things, really get it up?
I think that's a really good way to put it. It actually is an important part of the historical context for NATO and the agreement of the United States to enter into NATO in 1949. The Berlin crisis that you're referring to began just the year before, in 1948, with the Soviets imposing a blockade on access to the city of Berlin, Germany. And that caused a great deal of worry and consternation, I would say, in the United States and in Europe, because it appeared we might be on the brink of another war with the Soviets. Well, Harry Truman met that threat, as my colleague will explain more, with an airlift. So averted the war at that time. But you combine the Berlin crisis along with the coup in Czechoslovakia, also in the spring of 1948, and that helped set the tone, or set the stage for U.S. willingness to enter into NATO, because with the Czech coup, that was Soviet sponsored, so it was a takeover of a democratic country by the Soviets. And there was another communist country on the borders of Germany. And in the meantime, Russia, the Soviet Union had moved militarily into Eastern Europe during and after World War II. So it appeared to be that there was an iron curtain, as Churchill referred to, being set as a dividing line. And the fear was that the Soviets were going to press into Western Europe. There was resistance, strong resistance in this country to joining NATO from certain elements of Congress and the United States Senate. There was a strong tradition of isolationism in our history, and that certainly came to the fore, with the NATO debate, with senators such as Robert Taft of Ohio, just to name one, who's had concerns that we would be involved in what Washington referred to as entangling alliances, that we want to avoid those, and that we don't want to have U.S. war-making abilities be usurped by a foreign country or a group of foreign countries. So, and I mentioned this to our group that was here from these delegations last week, but I also emphasized that, that for Harry Truman, internationalism was in the U.S. best interest. It was in the U.S. national interest to be involved in the world, to be engaged in the world, and to undertake the collective security alliance that is NATO, among others.
This sounds so familiar. Isolationism, whether we should be involved in the world. What is the lesson for today's leaders, lawmakers, politicians?
Well, I think if you look at the lesson of Harry Truman, it is to stay involved in the world, and that's the best way to ensure our peace and global security and our own economic welfare, is to stay involved, so we're aware of the threats that arise and that we can meet them wherever they occur.
All right, Sam. Sam Boucher from the Truman Library and Museum, thanks for joining us on The Place for History
You're welcome.
on the KY3 Digital Desk.